Welcome to mypersonalfootballcoach.com's Soccer Player Development Podcast. Discover all the secrets, hints and tips about soccer player development and soccer coaching from some of the leading figures in world soccer. Here's your host, Saul Isaacson Hurst.
Welcome back, guys. Welcome back to another show. Apologies, I haven't been able to get more shows out sooner, but June is the busiest time of year for me. I've been working with some top players from all around the world, and supporting them, and so it's been a really busy time, but back on it now, releasing this podcast, and this week we've got a top one for you. This is Mike Dodds, who's Academy Manager at Birmingham City FC. First met Mike about 10-15 years ago, early years at Spurs, and he was also working in his early years there, and he's worked his way up at Birmingham all the way through the FP and YDP all the way to the Academy Manager's role. And it's interesting when you talk to people from clubs, you're always looking for something different, you get those real key takeaways, and it's really refreshing here. You know, you get to hear some real innovation and really interesting things that are going on at Birmingham. Real top academy, real top player development centre, producing players. Not obviously that Jude Bellingham's the famous one recently, but they got a strong track record of developing and producing players for the top level. So a real top interview, top guy, and I know you're going to enjoy it, and lots of really interesting takeaways. If you haven't yet, make sure you check out the Coaches Pass. We're currently doing a series of sessions with coaches from one of our partner clubs, Leyton Orient FC, another top academy in the lower leagues, but they've got a real interesting philosophy based around ball mastery and 1v1. So remember the Coaches Pass, check it out on My Personal Football Coach. It's the only place where you get live video sessions every single week from coaches from around the world and myself. So check it out. It's got a 7-day free money back guarantee. But without further ado, let's get into the show. So Mike Dodds, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate you've sent me a few texts, so I apologise it's taking longer than both of us wanted.
That's all right, mate. Got you here. That's the most important thing. So can you give us a brief outline of your playing and coaching journey up to this point?
Yeah, like most young kids that play football, obviously wanted to go down the professional route. Didn't quite happen for me, so I've got the second best job in the world, which is coaching the game. So didn't quite happen for me from quite a young age. I was very lucky in terms of when I reflect that I went to college and we had a little cohort of kind of young whippersnappers that the college recognised that were sporty but had some kind of academic prowess, maybe, if that's the phrase to use. And they put us on our kind of coaching courses alongside our BTEC in kind of sports development. And at the time, there was no real aspirations of being a coach. I'll be honest with you, you're kind of 17, 18. And you're just kind of living day to day and just enjoying yourself. But alongside that course, I did my level 1 and level 2. Went into the college that I went to were really, really good with me, and they put me on my B licence, which I know now the rules have changed slightly. You have to be a certain age, but I did my B licence at 18. Worked for 18 months voluntary at Coventry City from the age of kind of 18 to 20. Working the foundation phase, then got a part-time job with Birmingham City for 3 years, and then moved very quickly into being full-time, obviously before the introduction of EPP. So I was kind of 9-16 youth coordinator, which looking back at it almost killed me. And then obviously the EPP kicked in, moved into kind of YD phase, moved very quickly into kind of head of PDP, and then currently hold the role of head of academy. So I like to think I've pretty much done it all from a practical perspective.
So tell us about that first role at Coventry. You're a very young coach. You're working in academy football. Can't be that many. I remember we used to talk about Tottenham had quite a young staff. We were talking about early 20s, mid 20s. What was that? Yeah. What was that like for you as a young coach in that environment? What are the big takeaways that you're thinking back?
Massive eye opener. If I'm honest, I was terrible. Coventry actually had some really experienced staff at the time, which was massively helpful in terms of people kind of mid to late 60s that had been at the football club, that had been and seen it all. So I was massively fortunate from that perspective. But when you think back to it, I mean, I was terrible. Some of the sessions you put on, and some of the things you think you know at the time, actually makes me cringe a little bit, if I'm being completely honest with you. But
why was that then? Was just your stuff? You were just doing sessions that you just picked up?
I think I was just doing sessions from when I played as a kid. You just kind of replicate sessions that you do as a kid. I'll be completely honest with you. I'm 18 years old. I'm going through my B license. I'm working voluntary. And at that time, if I'm being completely honest, coaching really wasn't a career path for me. It was just, I enjoyed football, and I played a little bit, and I was doing a course, and I was fortunate to know some people at Coventry that gave me an opportunity to go in voluntary, and I just ended up doing it for 18 months. I'll be completely honest, I didn't take it too seriously. So, turning up, replicating sessions that you've seen before, you've been a part of, without any real knowledge or know-how of why you're doing what you're doing. But what it did do, and I've got to be very careful with this because I've got a bias towards this, it gave me, when I reflect on it, a perspective of, I had 18 months of not getting paid and being around people and being exposed to things, which gave me some really, really solid foundations. And I think sometimes when we have young coaches that come for part-time work and stuff like that, I've got to be very careful, because I still hold on to those values in terms of, well, come do 12 months voluntary, let's see how you get on, take your time. But I was incredibly, and this was it wasn't a plan, but I was incredibly patient during that period, just because I don't think I had any real aspirations. I just kind of worked week to week. But when I look back to it, I did 18 months voluntary, didn't get paid. I was doing 3 nights a week and Saturday and Sundays, just because I enjoyed it. Yeah. And I think those values always stuck with me, especially when we have young coaches that come to our place and ask for jobs. It's, one of the questions I always ask is, what's the part-time salary, or, what's the hourly rate? It's like, let's do 12 months and let's see how you get on. But I also appreciate that there are a lot of my biases, and I've got to be careful with that. I've got to be very careful with that.
Yeah, it's funny because I did a podcast earlier with a colleague from another club, Foundation Phase Lead, says exactly the same thing. He started doing voluntary, getting there, connecting. And I remember, when I first started out, I was eager just to get involved. I would have done anything for free just to be in the environment. And I think, it's part and parcel, isn't it, of that journey?
So, as I said, I can't sit here and say to everyone, it was a well thought out plan, and, from an early age that, I wanted to be in this position I'm in now. It's just kind of naturally evolved into this. It wasn't until many years down the line I kind of looked at it and thought, actually, I quite enjoy this, and I actually enjoy, the kind of teaching and learning. I actually enjoy working with young people. I actually enjoy working with like-minded adults that have more knowledge than me, that can pass it on to me. It wasn't until many years down the track that I kind of evolved into this kind of semi-obsessive developer of people and young people.
Tell us about that. Tell us about that 18 months then. What are the first things, looking back, what are the first things you picked up thinking, right, I remember that's gonna, that's changing me as a coach, that's changing my sessions. You're surrounded by those experienced practitioners. What are those main takeaways in those 18 months which improved you?
The how do I put this? This kind of week to week process of there's no shortcuts in terms of, as I said, it was 3 evenings a week. It was Saturday, Sunday. It was traveling up and down the country. The kind of because I go back to this point, I keep saying it, because I wasn't getting paid. When I reflect on it, it was the sheer enjoyment of being around the game that we all love. And there's something really addictive around football. And, there'll be thousands of people listening to this that will have that exact same feeling, that addictive love for the game, whether it's watching it, teaching it, playing it. I think the kind of the biggest thing during that period was just, I can never forget the kids. The kids were just like, it's like they'd been fed sugar 24/7. They were just bouncing from wall to wall. And I think one of the biggest things was how do you engage young people of that age to still have that kind of Tigger-like enjoyment for the game, but actually try to get some deep line kind of embedded learning as well, where you're not stifling them, but you're also following a kind of process and a journey from a learning perspective. I didn't do it very well, I'll be honest with you, but I've got a huge amount of respect for foundation phase coaches. From my personal opinion, I think they're the best coaches. Just because how they balance the enjoyment, how they balance the teaching and learning aspect, how they balance all those things is a art. It's an absolute mastery. We've got a gentleman at our place, Richard Brooks, and I think he's one of the best. His ability to juggle all those things with young people that have just got so much energy and love and enthusiasm and still try to follow a process I find fascinating. I'll be honest with you, when I'm ready, I'll end up doing a full circle. I will go back to the foundation phase. I think for me, it's the best part of academy football, the foundation phase.
Interesting. And so tell us a bit about that. Do you remember that, towards the end of the 18 months, what a typical Coventry session would look like there on the pitch there with the boys? No,
I think that really, in hindsight, shaped me a little bit, because they didn't really have a curriculum, but the coaches that I worked with were always very well planned and articulate around what they were working around, but they didn't really have a curriculum. And I'm not saying that's wrong or right, because I think you have to have process and you have to have a curriculum, and you have to have a way of working and going forward. And I think what Coventry did give me was the kind of artistic flair of or the foundations of that kind of artistic flair of thinking on the spot and dealing with the challenges that are in front of you, because we've all been there where we've got a session plan and you've realised very, very quickly that this isn't going to work, or little Jimmy hasn't turned up to the session, or little Jimmy's not in the right headspace to deal with what you want the session outcomes to be. So what Coventry did do, they give me a good insight. As I said, I'll go back to my point. I was terrible at it, but it gave me a very, very good insight into the kind of artistic side of coaching. What Birmingham did provide, I know I'll probably fast forward it a little bit, but what Birmingham did provide with the people there was very strong processes in terms of the coaching curriculum, and this flows into this and this leads into this bit. And I think between the two, in terms of my foundation, it gave me a little bit of both. So I was very fortunate. I was really, really fortunate in terms of my coaching.
Let's talk about that then, that Birmingham opportunity. How did that come about? And tell us about your first impressions when you arrived at the club.
Yeah, so I was actually a guinea pig on a pro license course. So I was a player on a pro license course, and Terry Wesley was actually on the pro license. And we just got chatting at lunchtime. Over lunch, he says, "Oh, what do you do?" Blah blah. I said, "I'll play a little bit, a bit part time." I said, "I'm actually voluntary at Coventry City," and he was at Derby County at the time. And he said, "Look, if you want to get paid, we're looking for some part time staff. Here's my number. Give me a shout." So I actually remember I messaged him a few weeks later saying, "Look, I'd be interested." Derby, from where I was living in Leamington Spa, Derby wasn't a million miles away. It was easy. It was close enough to get to work. I messaged him. He never got back to me. I thought, oh, that was it. And then he contacted me a few weeks later and said, "I've actually left Derby. I'm now at Birmingham City," which was great because it was even closer. When I met him, and he just said, "I've never seen you coach," and Terry was fantastic. He said, "But there's something about your personality I quite like. We've got an opening." I think I was assisting the under-9s. And he just offered me a kind of part-time coaching role there and then, which I took as being very young and naive. I was 19 or 20, just because I was getting paid. And there was I've been completely honest with you, there was no other reasoning behind it. It was just the fact that I was getting paid. But that was probably the most difficult 6 months going into Birmingham City, because Terry then left. Obviously, Christian took over. They obviously had a very, very strict curriculum in terms of the way they wanted to work, and I'd never worked like that. And I'll be honest with you, I really, really struggled for 6 months, where I actually remember coming home and speaking to my parents and saying, "I'm not sure if I want to do this." And it wasn't because I didn't enjoy it. I think it was because I didn't understand it, and I really struggled with it. And I actually remember there was 2 or 3 times my parents were great with me. They were like, "No, stick it out. And I'm so glad now that I did. And, it probably took me 6 to 9 months just to get my head around, so what is this coaching curriculum? And this links to this.
Give us a tasting, give us an idea that what were you confronted with?
In terms of, so you plan your Monday session with your under 9s, and then, how does the Monday session link to the Wednesday session? And who are you? So Birmingham City at the time, they were a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of identifying individuals within the session. And what are your outcomes? What are your learning outcomes? How does that learning outcome link to the next session? And what do you want the week to look like? And what are you focusing in the game? So what's your focus on as the kind of coach for the under 9s in the game? And how is little Jimmy getting what he needs? And what is little Jimmy good at? And what is he not so good at? And it was just overwhelming. And I actually remember the first 6 months, I really, really struggled. And I was very close to actually giving it up. And if it wasn't for my parents, I probably would have given it up. So what Coventry did do in hindsight, as we're talking and reflecting, what Coventry City did give me was the kind of artistic side of coaching where you could almost think on the spot. But what actually it didn't provide me with is that kind of teaching and learning foundation, which actually was almost a hindrance. So, just reflecting, there were some positives to the Coventry experience. There were also some negatives because it almost kind of gave me a false sense of what coaching looks like.
So give us a bit of a typical session, what that looked like as your first one in there with the 9s at Birmingham.
So we actually still kind of follow this model. We've evolved it. Obviously, we've been at Birmingham now for 12, 13 years. But we've actually evolved it. But it would be a warm-up, which would have some physical outcomes. Obviously, at the time, Terry and Christian were very staunch on the warm-up being involved with the football. Now I think for Birmingham, we're not as kind of direct with that in terms of it has to involve football. It might be some kind of TIG or multi-sports type activity as a warm-up. So it would be a warm-up that would lead into a technical practice, which the coach has autonomy over what that looks like, whether it's opposed, unopposed, whether it's a game format, non-game format. So it would go into kind of a technical element. There would be a tactical theme. Now we're talking about young boys here, so when we talk about tactical theme, we normally talk about 1v1 tactics or 2v2 tactics. We're not talking around, inverting fullbacks or stuff like that. So there would be a tactical theme that was leading to we always in the foundation phase finish with a game, regardless. Now the coach, at the time, the football club, so 10 years ago, the football club were very clear on those kind of stages. So warm-up, technical, tactical game. Where we've evolved a little bit over the years is, you could go warm-up straight into a game that then might lead into a technical practice that goes back into a game. I think that's where we've loosened off a little bit. But you'd still have those pillars, if that makes sense. You would have a warm-up element, you have a tactical element of the session and a technical element of the session. But what that looks like would be a little bit looser.
Interesting. And like Birmingham's known for producing skillful 1v1 type players, whether the wide players, obviously, on Bellingham coming through. Do you think that reflects the sort of stuff you're doing in is it a specificities, if you like? Is, you get what you put in type thing?
100%. And I think one thing I think we're very clear from a staff perspective is our programme looks very different to Wolves or an Aston Villa or a West Bromwich Albion, and we're comfortable with that. We've had boys that have come into our environment from other environments that have done really, really well, but we've also had boys leave our environment, go into other environments and do very well in their environments. I think we are what we are, if that makes sense, and we're comfortable with that, and we try not to hide away from that. We are an incredibly technical programme, which has its positives, but also has its negatives. It's the same with, a Wolves, Aston Villa, clubs in this area. They have a way of working, which I'm not saying is wrong or right. They believe in the way they work, and they produce players by doing it that way. And I think one thing I always say, and someone actually disagreed with me the other week when we had a conversation, I said, there's no wrong or right. There actually isn't any wrong or right, as long as there's some rationale or way of working. We work the way we work, which is very different to some of our competitors in the area. but it doesn't mean our program's any better or any worse. That's just the way we work.
Yeah, interesting. And we had Wes Hughes was on the show recently. He was talking just highly about his experiences working with you and in that environment. Particularly, he talked about the indoor venue you had and that tight space and the intensity there, and how he tried to bring it over to Wolves. So that was one of real good takeaway having that, and how that maybe like inner city working class club, if you like, players work hard. You have that sort of mentality. Tell us a little bit about those things.
Yeah, so we tried to. We're very keen on providing the boys and the coaches, and in terms of our environment, we're very keen on providing variety. I go back to my point then. There's no wrong, in my opinion, there's no wrong or right way to develop a player. But one thing we always try and provide our players is complete variety. So, for instance, what Wes will be alluding to, every kind of 3 weeks, we would have what we call dome games, which was, our indoor dome's probably an 8v8 pitch, but we would play, we would ask teams to come and play us, and we're very fortunate that we've got some really forward-thinking practitioners in youth development that wanted to be a part of it, where we would play 11v11 on an 8v8 pitch. Now, one thing I would stress to people is if you do that all the time, you just provide them with the same experience over and over. So we were really keen on providing that type of environment where it would be 100 mile an hour. The intensity would be ferocious. You would have no time, no space on the ball. But they also do need big areas as well. So I think where me and Wes work really well together, and I like to think that I kind of helped Wes in terms of his player development education, is you can't. So, for instance, some clubs have a position-specific program, which is fine. I think that is a part of player development. But you also have to provide them with the yin to the yang, if that makes sense. You have to provide them with a part of that program where they have complete freedom as well to go and express themselves. So the point I'm trying to make in terms of our games program is we would have dome games where we would play 11v11 on an 8v8 pitch, but we would also then go and play 11v11 on the biggest pitch we could possibly play on. So players could learn around running into spaces and running past people and having more time on the ball. So I think it's quite a simple concept, and I know a lot of clubs do it, but you've got to provide the players with a really varied program. I think Nick Cox said it once, and I think it's a really good phrase around, do you provide players with multiple different experiences, or do you just provide them with one experience over and over? And that's what we try and do at Birmingham. Is try and provide them with multiple different experiences, whether it be different oppositions, whether it be size of the pitch, or whether it be game formats. We are constantly on that wheel in terms of trying to provide them with constantly different experiences.
So you talked a bit about the technical work and the tactics, the 1v1s, the 2v2s. How does that progress up the foundation phase and into the YDP in terms of when the game opens up and you start doing a little bit more in-depth team stuff?
Yeah, so within our foundation phase, from kind of 12s onwards, I'd say, there's a huge focus on 1v1 defending, 1v1 attacking, tracking runners, running away from runners. That evolves into 2v2s, 3v3s, all those types of things. I think we have from our kind of 12 to 16s model, we have what we call a theming model. So they work for blocks of work on a theme. So, for instance, a few years ago, I mapped out a kind of 40-week program within our coaching curriculum where they would theme a team, and within that, the individuals within the team would theme an individual from that team. So let me give you an example. We had a centre forward, so we themed Atletico Madrid. We had a centre forward, so we played 4-4-2, and all our work was around the concept of your Atletico Madrid. So for this 10 weeks, we are theming what Atletico Madrid do. This was all within the framework of our coaching curriculum, but then the individuals within that would have their individual learning guides would be based around a player in their position. So we had a centre forward that had Diego Costa and João Felix, and although the team has a theme, the individuals within that team have a theme as well, which is based around the 11v11 team, if that makes sense. I don't know if I've articulated that particularly well. So our 12 to 16s program have an individual themed program that links into a team, if that makes sense. So when we did the under-16s a few years ago, we did a 40-week block, which we broke into 10 weeks, where we did Atletico Madrid, played 4-4-2, and they have a certain type of player. We then themed Sheffield United, which I know was a little bit extreme, but with the overlapping fullbacks, they played 3 at the back, which was completely different. We then themed Liverpool in terms of their 4-3-3, which was a real high pressing, high intensity game. And then we themed Man City, who play a 4-3-3 as well, but a different version of 4-3-3. And there was this is like, for the people that are listening, it wasn't just a 5-minute conversation. This was a day of planning around a 40-week block of learning, which we chose players, we chose teams that would get some kind of group tactical concepts out, which are all different. So those 4 teams were all different from a tactical point of view. But then what were the players within those teams? So for instance, let's go back to the boy that played as a centre forward. He had a 40-week block, where his learning guide was based around João Felix, Diego Costa, Billy Sharp, Sergio Aguero, Bobby Firmino. Now, that seems incredibly large, but what we did when we reflect on the season, we gave him as a centre forward 5 or 6 different ways of being a centre forward. Now, people that listen to me say, well, what happens if he is a Diego Costa type, runs in behind, combative, and you're asking him to be Bobby Firmino? But the point I would throw at people is we're trying to provide them with a holistic overview of player development. And just because your opinion, Sol, is this player is this type, how do we know he's that type? We don't know, because he's 14 years old and he's still learning the game. So he might look and have the attributes of a Diego Costa type player, but actually we haven't actually modelled his program around a Bobby Firmino way. He actually might be really, really good, or he might actually really take on the information around Bobby Firmino where you drop into little pockets. And our 12-16s program is actually quite unique. So we theme that for every age group all the way through. Individuals that link into a team concept, which then links into our coaching curriculum. It's actually, from a kind of being now the leader of the ship, is something we're very, very proud of.
It's interesting that, because you're learning through role play, if you like. I mean, I remember my time in the playground, I'm Peter Beardsley or Gazza or whatever. And it's very interesting because, that's how kids learn best play. I'm what does he do? I'll try and do that, emulate it. It's an interesting, really fascinating idea.
And yeah, so I think it's a really great point you bring up there, because I think we all do it, whether we're children or adults. So, for instance, I spoke to a coach at another club, and again, this is not me battering other people. This is just us being very clear on what we are at Birmingham City. And they have a black boot policy. Fine. That's completely fine. But that's their environment and their learning parameters. And they've produced some fantastic players. We do what you want. Like, wear whatever boots you want. For that exact principle, boys want to wear white Adidas boots because Jude Bellingham wear them. Great. Let them role model. Let them play with their imagination. It's honestly, and our environment is very much, well, who do you want to be? And let's kind of play with that and go with that concept. But we do it as adults. So you'll see up and down the country, especially with the older age groups, in particular, I'm generalising here, the older age groups, but people will copy Pep Guardiola's concept of a 4-3-3. So we do it as adults. We're no different. The role play element is no different. I know you've had him on your podcast before, and I think he's one of the best developers out there, Michael Beale. I had a coach where I did some appraisals recently, and he was quoting a lot of Michael Beale's work. He's just role playing Michael Beale. Michael Beale has influenced the next generation. We do it as adults. So why would we stop that kind of role play and experimental phase with children? And I think as soon as we kind of relax ourselves as adults and go, well, we actually do it. We do it. I love watching Tuchel at Chelsea and the way his team plays. I love watching Pep's teams. We still do it as adults. It's just a different context.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's that idea about, you said, giving them freedom. You want to be creative, and so rather than, because I think we've discussed this with many people in the shows that I think academy football sometimes they try and make it look like the first team, and like you say, what do I think it should look like? What do I think you should look like? How you should play? Giving players the freedom to go and do it and be individuals and creative, and what a great way to challenge them to learn new skills. Going, can you play like that player? Independent learners, if you like.
Yeah, and I just think what it does do, it streamlines the noise, because for that 10 weeks, their individual clips are around. I keep using Diego Costa. I don't know why I keep using him, I'll be honest with you, but his clips are all around Diego Costa, and then when he's reflecting on the game, we're not saying we're trying to kind of clone him, but he's then picking out the qualities from Diego Costa. And then the next 10 weeks, he's got Bobby Firmino's qualities. And what I think, where our kind of theming model and our learning concepts have evolved a little bit at the football club is, we're now talking to them around, well, what does Bobby Firmino don't do? What does Bobby Firmino not do that Diego Costa does do? So now you're getting some real dialogue and some reflection between the coach, the player, and they're analysing the very best players. And it's not just the very best players. We did a 10-week block on Sheffield United, just because we felt we had the players in that cohort of an age group that fitted with what Sheffield United did. It was quite unique in terms of the fullbacks overlapping. They had some real combative midfield players, and we just thought it was a really good fit. So it's not just about doing the top teams. It's also around giving them an education in football and what football looks like. It's not just Champions League teams. So we have that across the board. So our I think our under-13s team, back end of last season, did a 10-week theming model on Crystal Palace around this, because the coach wanted to really kind of nail home for a period of work around defending distances and being organised and being compact. So they themed Crystal Palace, and then in that group we had quite a creative winger, Wilfried Zaha. So there's loads of thought processes that go into it, and it's not just a 5-minute sit down and go, yeah, I'm doing this.
Fascinating. So let's just wind back then a bit. Then talk about then your progression into full-time football. Then you've gone from you're working for free for 18 months, you're part-time, then you're now full-time. Tell us a bit about that, how that happened, how that transition was like for you.
Yeah, so I was part-time for 3 years at Birmingham City. So I did the under-9s, then I did the under-12s, and then I did the under-14s, and then progressed into full-time work. One thing I think I missed out a little bit, obviously, while I was part-time at Birmingham City, I worked in a secondary school as a behavioural engagement tutor. So I worked with kids with perceived, and I use this phrase, perceived behavioural issues, when actually what that 3 years gave me was a real perspective of they didn't have behavioural issues, they were just unique. They were just all very unique individuals that needed maybe their programs tailored slightly. And again, indirectly, that gave me some really, really strong foundations around individual development. Because so I worked for, as I said, 2 years probably with individuals. I started to understand, well, this person actually is only behaving that way because he doesn't understand this, or he doesn't like this part of education, or doesn't like this part of the school. So how can we change it, adapt it to reshape? They weren't poorly behaved kids, they were just unique. And every child, we have a coaching curriculum, and we're very clear on, we actually have 50 curriculums in each age group if you've got 50 players, because each player needs their own curriculum within a framework. So I was very fortunate that I worked in a school as a behavioural engagement tutor, which gave me a really individualised lens on learning. I then obviously transitioned into kind of full-time work where I was a 9-16 youth coordinator, where I kind of overseen that whole 9-16 programme, which again gave me some unbelievable skill sets in terms of juggling multiple plays, dealing with large number of part-time staff, trying to have a grip on each age group while still trying to coach. So my foundation from a coaching perspective accelerated very, very quickly from working in a secondary school from an education point of view to then having almost 18 months, 2 years before the EGB kicked in, of trying to run a schoolboy program almost single-handedly. And I made so many mistakes, it's actually embarrassing, but those mistakes actually kind of shape you and help you in terms of the way you work from day to day.
Interesting. And when the EPPP came in, did that transition to a different role?
Yeah, so I transitioned to just 12 to 16s, and obviously brought in a foundation phase lead that looked after the kind of 7s to 11s. So the role didn't change significantly, if I'm completely honest. It just meant that I could focus my attention a little bit more on secondary school boys, which was a lot easier for me because obviously I worked in the secondary school for almost 3 years, which was kind of my, I won't say area of expertise because it was, I was only kind of 5-6 years into coaching. But that was kind of my area of comfort. So it allowed me to go into a little bit more detail and people have their opinions on the EPPP, but what I think it has done, it has allowed for greater depth of knowledge and greater depth of individualised planning for age groups. And what that did do that period, it allowed me just to solely focus on the 12 to 16 to all the secondary school boys.
Were you coaching a team at the time?
Yeah, so I took so for the first 2 years I took the under 14s, I think, and then I bounced around age groups. I felt by doing, after the kind of first 12 to 18 months of just working with a team, I felt I didn't have a good enough grip on the whole program in terms of the kind of thread. So then I bounced around kind of 12 to 16s. Once I felt that we were in a good place from a process and continuity point of view, I then took the 16s full time.
So tell us a bit more about the program, the YDP program. Obviously, you've got the theme weeks. Tell us about the day release program. How does that work at the club?
Yeah, so we don't offer day release to under 12s just because we feel it's their first year in school. And we feel the education side to set some real strong foundations for them in terms of getting settled at secondary school. We don't really offer a day release program on under 12s. We offer a day release program at 13s, 14s. They normally come out on a Thursday. So they come out as a kind of a group in the cell, which allows us, again, from when you go back to the previous point in terms of providing variety, we kind of mix those groups up. So the 13s get to train with older boys, the 14s get to train with younger boys. So they're in a cycle of, if you're an under 13, you're being stretched and challenged all the time. And as an under 14, you've almost got a little period of consolidation and the game being a little bit easier and you having a period of experimentation. So we band those groups together a little bit. So the 13s, 14s, train on a Thursday, so they come in, they do education in the morning, they do a session kind of between 11 and 11:30. They then have lunch, they then have a life skills session followed by some kind of analysis, whether that be individual, unit or team. They have a second session followed by gym and they're off. So they're in the building from kind of 8 o'clock, 8:15, and they leave about 4:45. And it's similar to the kind of 15, 16, so they have a Tuesday, similar process in terms of come in, 15, 16 to train together. 15s have to have a real stretch because they're training with older boys. 16s have a period of kind of, as we call, kind of consolidation and creativity and expression because they're playing with younger boys. And then what that also allows us to do is feed the under 16s into kind of transition into under 18s. So 13s, 14s train together on a Thursday, 15s, 16s train together on a Tuesday, which obviously allows us kind of probably from January onwards, the 16s to train more full time with the 18s.
Interesting. And obviously one of your most famous alumni just made his full England debut the other night for 90 minutes of football, Jude Bellingham. Tell us a little bit about him. I know because Wes talked about you guys training him at younger and an older age group. Tell us about what was he young as a young player? What was he like as he progressed through the academy? Was he always the outlier? Did you know he was going to be a top talent?
No, and I think, I'll be honest with you, the thing that's starting to kind of really rattle me a little bit is because obviously he's 17 and he's playing for England. People just think he's this kind of generational talent. I know he's a wonderful talent, but he came into pre-academy at kind of 7s and 8s. We didn't take him straight away. We took him based on the fact that I actually remember he was absolutely rapid. He was one of the quickest foundation phase players I've ever seen. And we took him based on the recruitment officer. I'll be completely honest, we were sat in a meeting. I was actually in that meeting, and obviously Jude's name got brought up. I quite like the boy, he's all right. He bounces around, he's got a lovely personality. And it was actually our recruitment officer, Simon Jones, who went, no, we're taking him. He's a definite take. Oh. And we went, and listen, we weren't saying he's a no, but we were like, okay, yeah, cool. Yeah, all right, yeah, we'll take him, no problems. And it wasn't till under 11s where we went, right, he probably needs a little bit of a challenge here, so we moved him up to the under 12s, and it wasn't probably till under 12s he started to accelerate a little bit, and he started to go, okay, this boy's a little bit different. Now no one could have predicted he's gone on and done what he's done. I mean, you'd be insane if people sat on the call and said, yeah, he was always going to be playing for England at 17. But it probably wasn't until he was under 12s where he started to go, right, this boy's a little bit different. We probably need to provide him with a unique, individualised programme. And I'll go back to my point where people say he's a generational talent. It really does rattle me, I'll be completely honest with you, because people have got no concept of the level of planning and detail, from like the theming model that we talked about earlier to we had a we will continue to do it, but we had a player exchange program, which people don't know about, where we basically sent a number of players to clubs in Europe to go and train in their academies. So wow. Jude, for instance, he went over to Freiburg in Germany and spent 7 or 8 days training in our academy, just because we wanted to provide him again with a different experience. And we sent,
How old was he when he did that?
13, 14, I think. But we wanted, again, provide them with multiple experiences so they can process things and sift things through. And he went over there. We didn't get involved. Obviously, we went and chaperoned him. Freiburg were really open to it and said, yes, send some players over. They can come and train with us. Freiburg were really, really good with us, and they run a magnificent program. And Jude went over for just over a week, trained in their program with the under 14s, 15s groups. And we just kind of said, no, you're going to go and do what the German boys do in this program. And we did the same with him. A year later, he went over to Cornellà, which is a program in Barcelona. They run a really, really good development program in Barcelona. So he went over to Spain for a week, trained. So people, the boy deserves a huge amount of credit. I'm not taking that away from him, but people have got no concept of the amount of work that went into trying to get what we see today.
So you talk about that, him like coming through as 12 and playing him up and stuff like that, and this great project you have. I mean, what do you do? What other things can you do day to day though to stretch those players who are progressing a little bit faster than the other players in the group? What other things can you do to stretch players rather than everyone says playing up? But what else can you do to help these players?
There's a number of things, and one thing I remember actually. When Jude left the football club, the academy coaches asked to do a Q&A with me and him, and I remember it was actually one of the best coach development things I've ever done, because he threw a load of stuff at me that I didn't know. So one of the things that we used to do a lot was underloaded, overloaded games. As I said, you can play with the area of the pitch. There was one time where we actually had day release, and Jude's version of events was I put him on the weaker team. I then apparently changed some conditions within the game around the number of passes you could make in the back area of the pitch. When the ball went into the top area of the pitch, it couldn't come back. You have to keep it in the top area of the pitch, all those types of things. I then, within the game, would change. So this was Jude's story. I changed boys over. I then would change the underloaded, overload aspect of it. And I remember him actually saying he left day release, got in his car with his mum and said, I don't want to go back to Birmingham City. And I'll come to the kind of moral point of the story is he said, I don't want to come back to Birmingham City. And the parents, again, deserve a huge amount of credit because they obviously sifted through that kind of teenage brain, which was kind of highly emotional. But Jude actually didn't talk to me for 3 months, and I didn't realise. He actually said to me, he goes, I was that angry with you and you pushed that many of my buttons. I didn't talk to you for 3 months. But the point I'm trying to make is when I reflected on that is I should have, when I reflect, I should have been a lot more open with what I was doing, because I think just doing it and going, right, we're going underloaded, overloaded, and then just kind of rolling that out without actually explaining, well, this is why we're doing it. Like, it's going to be hard at these points, but where does this link? So you might have a player sent off, or what is the benefits of being overloaded? Well, you've got spare man, so you can always find a spare man, and you can have a lot more of the ball. I think where I've failed players in the past is not actually articulating why I'm doing what I'm doing. Now, there is also, and I'm going to contradict myself here, there is a value of sometimes not telling them and actually them trying to understand why we're doing what we're doing. But in that story, which Jude tells really, really well to our academy staff, I was pushing him to the extreme. I was pushing him to the absolute extreme. I knew exactly what I was doing. Where I failed him was I should have at the end of the session, or I should have during the session, maybe just had a conversation with him, and I didn't, and I left him. And I think that's a really important message for coaches that listen. There are so many constraints you can put on sessions that doesn't have to, when you're trying to stretch your best players or any player, it doesn't have to just be playing up an age group. There's so many you can do, but it's understanding when do I need to articulate this to the player so they understand, or when do I not need to tell them so they can figure it out. I think it's the really, really skillful bit of coaching.
I think it's an interesting point there, because you're always, in academy football, or, you're always looking, right, how can I challenge this player? Like I say, stress this player. And like you say, a lot of the time it's an inner monologue or talking with your colleagues. But like you say, sometimes the players just say, oh yeah, look, now he's struggling a little bit, it's working a little bit, rather than saying, okay, how was that? You're reacting. And I suppose it makes them a little bit more reflective as well and analytical if you're including them in that sort of process, right?
100%. And I think one thing that I always take from that CPD we did with our staff was I have an understanding of why I'm doing what I'm doing, but the kind of icing on the cake, or the cherry on the top of the cake, is when, where and how do I need to articulate that? Do I need to articulate it? Do I need to get the players to understand what we're doing, or do I allow them to figure out what we're doing and let them figure out for themselves? That for me is skillful coaching. That's when that is the kind of, for anyone that's listening, if you can kind of master those bits, and you'll always make mistakes, that's part of coaching. But if you can kind of de-pick those little bits, that's really kind of deep level thinking of coaching, in my opinion.
Interesting. So let's move on now to your progress to the, your as they say, captain of the ship. Your academy manager. Tell us about that process, how that came about, and what's that been like for the last few months?
Very much different, I'll be completely honest with you, because we've had quite a turbulent time, without going into too much detail. Obviously, Christian Speaking was the Academy Manager for the best part of a decade, and he's one of the best out there for me at what he does. And he had obviously run the programme the way he felt the programme should be run, and Stuart English, who was head of coaching, was a huge part. There were two monumentally strong and influential characters within the programme, not just in terms of the position they held, but in in terms of the way they went about their daily business. We'd lost them very quickly in quick succession. So obviously Christian moved on. The club asked me to carry on his work. And I think that was more from a point of view of the fact that I'd been at the football club best part of 13 years. And I kind of knew the kind of coaching program, the technical elements of the program at the back of my hand. What's been a baptism of fire for me is the bits that Christian is incredibly competent at and probably excels at are quite foreign to me in terms of I've gone from heading up the kind of professional development phase and looking after the 18s and 23s to now looking after kind of 42 full-time members of staff, 50 part-time members of staff. How do I communicate information? Where do I divide my attention? You've got other things thrown into the mix in terms of parents, agents, all those types of things. You realise, one, just how well Christian did. This is just my opinion, how well Christian did in terms of balancing all those things. But not only that, just how big the operation is. And I think the biggest disappointment I have at the moment, as I said, I'm only kind of 7-8 months into the role. And it's something that I will address is the time on the grass and those kind of 13 years of improving myself from a practical perspective in terms of working with players is now limited. And I actually remember John McDermott saying something around you work yourself into a position where you actually stop doing the bits that got you into that position, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's so true. And I think the one real big challenge for me is trying to keep doing what I think I'm good at or what's got me into this position while still trying to help run the program.
And I mean, it must be difficult to imagine all those other things, upskilling yourself in terms of the admin and those things, like you say, and all the challenges and the things and all the processes that go on. How challenging is that?
Really challenging because it doesn't fuel a lot of my biases, if I'm honest. If I could, the previous role I had where I was kind of out with the 18s and 23s every day is almost like the utopia role because you're just on the grass all the time and planning sessions and thinking about individuals. Now you're thinking about everything else. It's a massive challenge, but it's one I think I will. Well, I know I will reflect on in the next kind of 4 or 5 years and see it as a huge growth period for me in terms of whatever the future looks like for me.
I think. Sorry to interrupt you, Dodds. I think it's actually interesting because I've been at clubs where the management changes and someone new comes in and new ideas. They come to a different environment and they change everything, maybe slowly, and you lose maybe your identity, what you had before. So I think it's real positive because you're obviously such a great track record that the system, like you say, you created it. I suppose my next question is, I suppose your challenge is now, how do you take it on? How do you progress it? How do you make it even better? Now once you've been in that system.
It's a really good question. I think the stuff where I've almost let the staff down in the last 6 months has been because I've spent less time around the players and the staff and the teams. Some of the kind of, as we said, the planning and the delivery and the reflection and the theming model and the individualised part of our programme, in particular in the 18s, 23s, has loosened off a little bit. And that's no disrespect to the staff. That's no disrespect for the staff at all. But I think in particular around the 18s and 23s, I need to spend more time in terms of helping. And when I say helping, I'm not holding a hand, it's just providing another lens and another opinion, helping around individualising the programme for the 18s and 23s boys, around trying to get them in our team or get them alone or get them a new club or whatever that looks like. I mean, to go back to your point is how does it evolve? In terms of our coaching programme, I think we know what we are, and I don't think we need to change that. The core of us still the same. I think how we evolve is I'm not Christian Speakman. And I think it's trying to get the staff and the program to understand, although the practical elements of our program have to stay consistent for the players and the parents because they brought into that product. The kind of day-to-day process might look slightly different because from a selfish point of view and from a point of perspective of what I feel is best for the program, I want to still be out on the grass. And Christian was very much not on the grass as much, or he would be much more of a watcher in terms of watching sessions, watching games. I'm a lot more of a doer. So that's where our program will evolve a little bit around me being just as visible as Christian, but maybe being more practical based rather than process based.
Interesting. And there is a natural evolution coming anyway, or revolution if you like. You're going to Cat 1. We are Cat 1 now. Tell us a bit about that then. How was that? How challenging is that? And what do we look forward to expect from the changes in the academy now?
In terms of the way we recruit, obviously you now have the option to recruit nationally, but I've always said this, we are incredibly fortunate that we have the second biggest city in the country. I appreciate there is a huge amount of competition, but the city does provide for us in terms of the catchment area, and there are always players around. So from a recruitment perspective, I don't see a huge amount of change, but what I do envision, obviously, we've increased our staffing numbers, so we've got an additional 2 full-time coaches, as well as additional support staff. But we've appointed an additional 2 full-time members of staff. From a coaching perspective, there will be some pressure on the coaching department in terms of delivering an even greater individualised program for our players. The club have financially backed the Category 1 in terms of infrastructure and new staffing. But I've said this to the staff, it's not a goodwill gesture. The club are investing X amount of money to increase the budget and the number of full-time staff. There's going to have to be a return on that investment. Now, even when you ask me the question around Jude, I actually don't like talking about Jude, because although we should celebrate success and we will always be proud of Jude's success, Jude's gone. The board are not interested in Jude. They want the next one. And Jude's been a blessing and a curse in terms of a blessing around people will look at us and go, oh, there might be some good work going on at Birmingham because you've got that calibre of player coming through your programme. But it's also a curse in terms of the owners now want the next one. So there is a degree of pressure on myself and the staff to ensure that productivity line is consistent, if that makes sense.
So how many full-time, tell us about, what's your full-time coaching staff at the moment? Run through your full-time coaches through the from the bottom upwards.
Yeah, so we have 2 full-time foundation phase staff, 3 full-time YDP staff, 3 full-time goalkeepers, 4 full-time professional development phase coaches. We have 2 head of coachings, one that deals with more the bottom end of our program, or the babies, one that deals with the top end, more older boys, and obviously myself. I'm still holding on to the fact that I'm a full-time coach that has got some kind of management responsibilities. Well,
you talk about that. In my experience, obviously we had John McDermott, like I say, very much hands-on on the pitch a lot with the 18s and the 23s. And then obviously Neil Bath at Chelsea a little bit the other way, a bit like you said, Christian, very much more the management style. So I suppose it's about what style academy manager you want to be. And luckily you're the boss, so you can decide, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where the kind of next 6 months, the transition is going to be quite hard for the staff that we have. I think because they've been so used to one way of working, although it's not going to be a cosmic shift in any way, shape or form around what we're doing day to day, the shift is going to be, and I think it's like you've alluded it quite well, a John McDermott who is on the grass and he's very much a practitioner of player development. has been hugely successful from it. But obviously Neil Bath has been just as successful in doing it his way. And it goes back to my point. I don't want to keep repeating myself. There's no actually wrong or right. It's just making sure we're very clear in terms of what it looks like, and everyone's on board and everyone's going in the same direction. So I think the evolution over the next 6 months will be very much around me and my role. And I don't mean that from a selfish perspective. That's, just because, I'm Mike Dodds, Christian Speakman's Christian Speakman. And the program isn't going to change, but there's going to be processes and elements of the program that will change naturally, just because you've got two different people running the ship or leading the ship, if that makes sense.
Interesting. And then what about yourself then? What are your aspirations for the future? There's not that you've done every job at Birmingham, so what's what's next for you?
Look, I think in the short term we've had a really difficult 6 to 12 months at the academy for, again, multiple different reasons, and I think I'm really proud of myself, and I'm not one to praise myself or big myself up, or I don't know what the phrase is, but I'm probably the most critical person of myself than anyone. But one thing when I reflect now over the last 6 months of just steadying the ship and slowing down some of the anxieties and worries that came around our program. So I'm really proud of myself around the kind of my behaviours and being really consistent and trying to make sure everyone understands that the program's still running the way it's running and there's not really any cosmic shifts. So in terms of the last 6 months, I think my focus has just been I've got a roundabout way of just kind of steadying the ship. I think I've got to have a look at whether this is the role that I actually want to do. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way to the role of a football club, but I think that is something that I need to reflect on, because my person being, I'm a coach, and I've got to do what's right for the 150 boys in our programme, the parents and the staff, that although the kudos and the ego of Academy Manager might turn people on, it's not something that I've ever really thought about. And I've got to do the right thing by all those people in our programme around, am I the right person to steer this ship? So that's something that I need to reflect on. I think at some point I will leave Birmingham City. I think I have to leave Birmingham City. Again, that's something I'm very vocal about, because I've spoke a huge amount here around variety and experiences our young players, and I'm a hypocrite because I've only worked I've worked at Birmingham City, but I've worked at Birmingham City for 12 years. I haven't experienced anything else. So at some point I will leave Birmingham City. What time frame that looks like, I'm not sure, but I do want to experience something else for my own growth and my own development. At some point as well, I think I probably will have a little bit of a break from the industry. I think it's really important to have a period where you have some perspective on what you've actually done, and reflect on things that you've done well and things you've not done so well. So I think I've got three things. I'm trying to summarise it. I've got a really long way of summarising is, am I the right person to kind of steer Birmingham City into, as you said, this kind of next period of their evolution as a football academy, going to Cat 1, and they've got some fantastic young footballers. Am I the right person? The second bit would be, at some point I do need to broaden my horizons and experience something different. And a third bit would probably be experiencing maybe a different industry, or experiencing something away from the industry that I'm currently at. They would be probably the three things in terms of what the future look like. I'm not a huge one on timelines. I don't like timelines because I think you get bound by it and you put pressure on yourself around it. I'm a huge believer it'll happen when it happens. So if your next question was, well, when's that going to be? I'm not sure.
I'm more than happy with that. As top draw. Lastly, what would your advice be to a young aspiring coach who wants to, one, get into academy football? We talked about voluntary work earlier, and then two, have a successful career and like yourself, and work full time in the game.
That's a great question. I think the first thing that always jumps when that question gets up to it, one thing that always kind of jumps into my head when people ask me that question is you got to be authentic. I'll go back to the point I just made. Christian Speakman was Academy Manager at Birmingham City for the best part of a decade and was outstanding at it. And he's a completely different character to me. And that's not to say Christian's way of doing it or the way that I see the academy evolving is the wrong or right way. So I think be genuinely authentic around who you are as a person. I think the next point I would make is, I've been coaching now for 15 years, I think. And I feel like the more I'm involved in it, the more I realise I don't know. And I think when I look back at the young Mike Dodds, I think I was probably kind of the first 4, 5, 6 years of my coaching a little bit probably arrogant and naive around thinking you know what you know when actually you don't. And I look at people like your Alex Inglethorpes, your John McDermott's, your Michael Beals, those types that have been in the industry a lot longer than me and are far better coaches and practitioners than I am, and they're still striving, and they're still have a thirst for knowledge and getting better and improving what they're doing. The point I think I'll make to young people is enjoy the journey, and there's no the journey actually, and this might put a damper for people, it doesn't stop. There's no end point. There's no, right, I've done that now, or I'm a master at this. And just enjoy it. I think people, when they listen to podcasts, there's loads of fantastic quotes and phrases and bits of information which I think is hugely important for a young person. But just enjoy it. Enjoy learning, enjoy being around people. Don't take yourself too seriously. You're going to make mistakes. It's a part of the process. Just enjoy the journey. As I said, I've been doing this 15 years and I don't even feel like I've scratched the surface of what player development looks like or people development. I think that's where I have an unhealthy obsession with the industry that I work in. Because I want to learn more. I want to know more. I want more feedback. I'm not sure if that's answered your question, mate.
Yes, mate. Doddsy, cheers, pal. It's been amazing. Appreciate your time, mate.
No worries. Thanks, mate. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for tuning in to the MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Soccer Player Development Podcast. MyPersonalFootballCoach.com's Dynamic Ball Mastery Program is the world's leading online individual technical training program, proven and developed at the highest level in the English Premier League. Sign up now to train like the pros and take your game to the next level. Master the ball, master the game.